pirate armada was 6 hours away. The evacuation shuttles were sabotaged, and the hull was already failing. The invaders forgot one critical variable, however. A human engineer was on board, and humans simply do not know how to die quietly. Acheron Station was never meant to be a fortress. It was a glorified truck stop, a deep space refueling depot suspended precariously above the swirling, methane-rich atmosphere of a gas giant known only as Sector 4 Prime. It was a rusting bucket of bolts held together by sheer luck and the fading hopes of its multi-species crew. And on standard galactic date 409, it was officially declared dead. Isaac Fletcher wiped a streak of synthetic grease from his forehead, his graying hair matted with sweat. Isaac wasn't a soldier. He was a mechanical engineer, a former structural consultant who had spent years designing orbital defense platforms for Lockheed Martin back on Earth before taking a high-paying, low-stress civilian contract with the Coalition. He had come to Acheron for a simple 6-month gig. Upgrade the life support scrubbers, fix the atmospheric regulators, and collect a paycheck. He was currently elbow-deep in a primary ventilation shaft when the station-wide alarm began to scream. It wasn't the standard rhythmic pulse of a meteor shower warning, nor the high-pitched trill of a localized fire. This was the long, mournful, bone-rattling wail of a code red. Imminent hostile contact. Isaac slid out of the maintenance hatch, wiping his hands on his coveralls. He jogged down the dimly lit, flickering corridors toward the command center. When he arrived, the atmosphere was suffocatingly thick with despair. Commander Wyatt, an avian-descended alien whose feathers were ruffled in a display of extreme distress, stood over the central hollow table. Wyatt was a career bureaucrat assigned to this backwater post as punishment, not for his tactical brilliance. Beside him stood Security Chief Logan, a hulking reptilian enforcer whose scales were currently flushed with the pale gray of absolute terror. "Status," Isaac demanded, his voice cutting through the panicked chatter of the bridge crew. Wyatt didn't even look up. He just pointed a trembling, taloned finger at the holographic projection in the center of the room. "The Blood Iron Fleet," Wyatt whispered, his translator matrix rendering his native clicks into a distinctly grim Western accented drawl. "They just dropped out of hyperspace on the edge of the system. 3 destroyers, 1 dreadnought, dozens of boarding craft." Isaac squinted at the tactical readout. "Pirates. What do they want with a refueling depot?" "They don't want the fuel," Logan growled, his deep voice vibrating in his broad chest. "They want the raw tritium stored in our lower vaults, and they don't leave witnesses. We have 6 hours before they reach weapons range. Then we evacuate," Isaac said reasonably. "Fire up the escape shuttles. We can make the jump to the nearest Coalition outpost before they intercept." Officer Higgins, a lanky amphibious technician who had always rubbed Isaac the wrong way, shook his head. "We can't. The launch bays are sealed. Someone or something fried the primary launch couplings 30 minutes ago. The shuttles are fused to the docking clamps. We are trapped." A heavy silence fell over the command center. The realization settled over the crew like a physical weight. The communications array was down. The escape ships were dead. The station's meager defensive shields were barely enough to deflect microasteroids, let alone military-grade plasma artillery. "So, what's the plan?" Isaac asked, crossing his arms. Wyatt slumped into his command chair, resting his head in his hands. "We initiate the scuttling protocol. We vent the atmosphere to ensure a quick, painless end before they board us. It is the only merciful option left." Isaac stared at the alien commander, then at the rest of the crew. They were all nodding. They were actually accepting it. They were just going to sit down and die. A familiar hot spark ignited in Isaac's chest. It was the same stubborn fury that had once driven him to successfully redesign an entire Boeing propulsion system overnight just because a manager told him it was impossible. "You're joking, right?" Isaac scoffed. "Mr. Fletcher, please," Wyatt said softly. "You are human. You are new to the Outer Rim. You do not understand what the Blood Iron Fleet does to their captives. Death by vacuum is a blessing." "I understand math, Commander," Isaac snapped, stepping up to the hollow table and aggressively swiping Wyatt's grim tactical display away. replacing it with the station's architectural schematics. I understand that we are sitting inside 3 million tons of refined durasteel, titanium, and hyperdense polyalloy. I understand that we have 4 Class 5 fusion reactors powering this truck stop. And I understand that I am absolutely not dying today. The station has no weapons, Logan argued, slamming his heavy fist on the console. We have 3 civilian-grade mining lasers and a hull that breaches if someone sneezes too hard. We cannot fight them. We don't have military weapons, Isaac corrected, a dangerous grin spreading across his grease-stained face. But I spent a decade engineering weapons of mass destruction for Raytheon and Lockheed. Let me tell you a little secret about human engineering, Logan. There is no such thing as civilian equipment. Everything is a weapon if you push it past its safety limits. Isaac slammed his hand onto the console, isolating the station's lower industrial sectors on the hologram. We have 6 hours. Logan, I need every security guard you have. Wyatt, give me full override codes to the mainframe. Higgins, get down to engineering and start bypassing the thermal regulators on reactors 3 and 4. Higgins blinked his wide amphibious eyes. Bypass the regulators? But the ISO safety protocols. Screw the protocols, Isaac roared. By dawn, this station is either going to be a fortress or it's going to be a radioactive sun. Now move. The next 5 hours were a blur of sparks, shouting, and the smell of ozone. Isaac Fletcher became a man possessed. He stripped off his heavy jacket, leaving him in a grease-stained undershirt as he dashed from sector to sector, barking orders and tearing Acheron Station apart from the inside out. He started in the mining bay. The station possessed 3 heavy-duty plasma cutters, massive, slow-moving industrial lasers meant to carve ice and rock off passing asteroids. They were mounted on sluggish hydraulic armatures. They take 30 seconds to pivot and lock on, Logan pointed out, watching skeptically as Isaac ripped the control panel off the primary laser with a crowbar. Not if we remove the safety dampeners and tie the targeting matrix to the station's collision avoidance radar, Isaac muttered, his fingers flying across a bundle of fiber optic cables. He was splicing a military-grade targeting logic he had memorized years ago into the crude civilian software. You're overpowering the servos, Logan warned. If they pivot that fast, the hydraulic lines will burst. Then we reinforce them, Isaac shouted over the din of the machinery. Get me the high-pressure suspension coils from the landing gear in Bay 4. It's essentially the same Caterpillar hydraulic tech they use on Earth for heavy earth movers. Can take the strain. We're turning these rock melters into point defense cannons. While Logan's men reinforced the lasers, Isaac sprinted to the atmospheric processing plant. The station generated oxygen by separating volatile chemicals from the gas giant's upper atmosphere. The byproducts, highly explosive hydrogen and toxic fluorocarbons, were carefully vented back into space through precisely calibrated exhaust ports. Isaac found Tech Officer Higgins standing nervously by the main control terminal. Higgins, have you disabled the venting sequences? Isaac demanded. Higgins stammered, holding a data pad like a shield. I started, Fletcher, but the system is locked. If we stop venting, the pressure in the holding tanks will exceed structural limits. They will detonate. That's exactly the point, Isaac growled, shoving Higgins aside and typing furiously on the terminal. He initiated a sequence that made the alien technicians gasp. He was rerouting the venting pipes. Instead of safely expelling the explosive gases outward into the void, he was channeling them into the outer airlocks and the primary docking rings. Fletcher, what are you doing? Wyatt's voice crackled over the intercom. I'm building a moat, Isaac replied grimly. When they try to breach the airlocks, they won't find a pressurized hallway. They'll find a compressed cloud of pure hydrogen and liquid oxygen. One spark from a cutting torch and the entire docking ring becomes a directional claymore mine. It's the same principle as reactive armor on a tank. You are destroying the station to save it? Wyatt asked, horrified. I'm sacrificing the porch to save the house, Commander. Now let me work. But as Isaac worked, something nagged at the back of his mind. The speed at which the station was failing didn't make sense. The escape shuttles being fused to the clamps, the communications array going dark precisely when the pirate fleet arrived, the locked terminals in the atmospheric plant. It wasn't just bad luck. It was an inside job. Isaac paused, wiping his brow, and glanced at Higgins. The lanky alien was furiously tapping on a secondary console, his eyes darting nervously toward the hangar bays. Isaac quietly pulled up the station's internal diagnostic log on his wrist comp. Someone was actively countering his commands. While Isaac was pressurizing the airlocks to create explosive traps, someone was silently bleeding the pressure out through the auxiliary vents. Isaac didn't say a word. He just picked up a heavy steel hydrospanner. He walked slowly across the grating, the hum of the reactors masking his footsteps. When he was right behind Higgins, he slammed the spanner down onto the alien's console, shattering the screen into a web of sparks and glass. Higgins shrieked and scrambled backward. "You're bleeding the lines, Higgins," Isaac said, his voice dangerously low. "You locked the shuttles. You cut the comms. You're the reason they're coming here. You sold us out." Two security guards raised their pulse rifles, looking confusedly between the human engineer and the amphibious technician. "He's insane," Higgins cried out, pointing a webbed finger at Isaac. "The human is suffering from space dementia. He's trying to blow up the station. Stop him." Isaac didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbing Higgins by the collar of his uniform and slamming him against the bulkheads. "How much did they pay you, huh? How much tritium did they promise you to leave the back door open? You're a fool, Fletcher." Higgins spat, dropping the facade, his eyes narrowing with malicious intent. "The Blood Iron Fleet is unstoppable. I made a deal. I opened the doors and they let me live. They'll give me a ship. If you fight them, they will skin you alive. You have 1 hour left. You can't win. Lock him in the brig," Isaac snarled, throwing Higgins to the security guards. "And if the power goes out, shoot him." Isaac turned back to the shattered console. He had lost 20 minutes of prep time. He had to manually seal the vents now. He tapped into his radio. "Logan, Wyatt, the saboteur is in custody. But we have a bigger problem. Higgins transmitted our internal blueprints to the fleet before I smashed his rig. They know exactly where we are weak." "Then all hope is lost." Wyatt's voice trembled. "No," Isaac said, a cold, predatory smile creeping onto his face. "If they have our blueprints, it means they think they know what we're going to do. They expect a broken station. They expect standard protocols." Isaac opened the main breaker box for the station's artificial gravity and lighting systems. "Let's give them a proper human welcome." Shutting down all non-essential power. Going dark. Across the massive expanse of Acheron Station, the lights flickered and died. The comforting hum of life support faded into an eerie, oppressive silence. In the pitch blackness of space, the station became a ghost waiting. Proximity alarms didn't blare. Isaac had disabled the audio warnings to maintain absolute silence. Instead, a singular flashing red light on the command center console pulsed like a dying heartbeat. "Visual contact," Logan hissed, peering through the reinforced plastisteel observation window. Isaac stood beside him, clutching a remote detonator he had hastily wired together from a busted comms link and a commercial SpaceX pressure valve. Outside, the void of space was suddenly scarred by the fiery blue streaks of sublight engines. The Blood Iron Fleet had arrived. At the center of the formation was the Dreadnought, a massive, jagged wedge of dark metal that looked like a floating nightmare. But it was the vanguard that approached first, 24 sleek, heavily armed boarding ships swarming toward Acheron Station like parasites looking for a host. "They're not even raising shields," Wyatt noted, his feathers flattened against his head in fear. "They think we're defenseless." "Good," Isaac whispered. "Primed, overridden, and linked to the collision radar, just like you asked." The security chief confirmed, his claws hovering over the firing mechanism. "Hydraulic pressure is at 300%. The lines are screaming." "Hold," Isaac commanded. The pirate boarding craft moved in tight formation. They were aiming straight for the primary docking rings, exactly as the blueprints Higgins had provided would have suggested. They expected to latch on, burn through the airlock doors, and slaughter the crew in their sleep. 50 kilometers, 30 kilometers, 10 kilometers. They're initiating docking procedures, Wyatt warned. 5 seconds to physical contact. Now, Logan, light them up. Logan smashed his fist down on the firing console. On the exterior hull of the station, the 3 massive industrial mining lasers, originally designed to slowly melt ice at a range of 100 m, violently snapped into position with terrifying speed. The reinforced hydraulic lines groaned, but they held. Instead of a slow, steady cutting beam, Isaac had bypassed the capacitors. The lasers discharged all their stored energy in a series of staccato, blindingly bright microsecond bursts. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The beams, thick as redwood trunks, lashed out into the void. They didn't just hit the pirate ships. They evaporated them. The unshielded boarding craft at the front of the formation were instantly turned into expanding clouds of superheated slag. Direct hits, Logan roared, a massive, toothy grin splitting his scaly face. 6 targets destroyed. Panic visibly rippled through the pirate formation. The remaining boarding craft scattered, abruptly breaking their approach vectors and frantically engaging their deflector shields. But they were too close. They're swarming. They're targeting the lasers. Wyatt yelled, watching the tactical display as the surviving pirate ships opened fire. Bolts of red plasma slammed into Acheron's hull, shaking the command center. Let them, Isaac said coldly. The lasers did their job. They broke the formation. Now we spring the trap. 2 pirate ships, realizing the lasers couldn't track them if they got under the station's defense perimeter, swooped low and slammed their magnetic docking clamps onto Hangar Bay C. They've attached to the lower ring, Logan shouted. They're cutting through the outer door. They really should have checked the atmospheric readings, Isaac muttered. He thumbed the switch on his makeshift detonator. Down in Hangar Bay C, the pirates burned through the outer seal with a thermal lance. But as the heavy blast door gave way, they weren't met with the terrified faces of a surrendered crew. They were met with 50,000 cubic feet of highly compressed, oxygen-rich hydrogen gas, heavily laced with fluorocarbons. The spark from the pirates' thermal lance ignited the mixture instantly. The explosion was magnificent. In the vacuum of space, it was silent, but the shockwave violently rocked the entire station. A brilliant, blinding sphere of orange fire erupted from the hangar bay, channeling through the pirate ship's own breached airlocks. The 2 boarding craft were gutted from the inside out, their hulls tearing open like cheap aluminum cans. The blast forcefully detached them from the station, sending their burning, spinning husks spiraling down into the gravity well of the gas giant below. Hull breach in Sector C, Wyatt called out, though his voice was laced with awe rather than panic. Auto bulkheads have sealed the sector. We held the pressure. That's 2 down, 6 to go, Isaac said, wiping sweat from his eyes. But the victory was short-lived. A sudden, massive tremor shook the command center, throwing Isaac to the floor. The emergency lights flared, bathing the room in a bloody red glow. Report, Isaac yelled, scrambling to his feet. It's not the boarding craft, Logan yelled, staring at the console. It's the Dreadnought. They've realized we're fighting back. They just fired a heavy mass driver round into our lower engineering deck. Isaac's heart stopped. Engineering? That's where reactors 3 and 4 are. Fletcher! A frantic voice crackled over the intercom. It was one of the security guards left in the brig. Fletcher! The blast knocked out the localized power grid. The cell doors failed. Higgins is out, and he's locked himself in the primary coolant control room. Isaac swore violently. He's going to shut down the coolant flow to the reactors. If they melt down, the station cracks in half. I'm sending a security team, Logan barked. No time, Isaac yelled, sprinting for the door. By the time they cut through the blast doors, we'll be vaporized. Keep those lasers firing, Logan. Keep the fighters off our back. I'll handle Higgins. Isaac ran faster than he had in 10 years. He flew down the access ladders, sliding down the railings, ignoring the klaxons and the groaning of the station's overstressed metal skeleton. He reached the engineering deck. The air was thick with smoke, and the heat was already rising. Through the reinforced glass of the coolant control room, Isaac could see Higgins. The alien was frantically typing into the master console, initiating a manual purge of the liquid nitrogen coolant. Higgins looked up, saw Isaac through the glass, and smiled. He pressed a button, and the heavy intercom crackled to life. "I told you, human," Higgins' voice echoed in the hallway. "You can't win. The Dreadnought will rip this station apart. I am securing my passage." Isaac didn't bother arguing. He looked around the smoke-filled corridor. He needed to get through that door, but it was 3 in of solid plastil. He looked up. Running along the ceiling of the corridor was a secondary high-pressure coolant line, a massive insulated pipe that fed into the reactor's auxiliary heat sinks. Isaac grabbed a heavy plasma torch from a nearby tool rack. He didn't aim at the door. He aimed at the massive pipe directly above the control room's air circulation intake vent. "What are you doing?" Higgins yelled over the intercom, his smile faltering. "You'll flood the corridor." "I'm an engineer, Higgins," Isaac yelled back, igniting the torch. "I solve problems." Isaac sliced into the high-pressure valve. He didn't cut it completely, just enough to compromise the seal. Then he grabbed a heavy wrench and smashed it against the weakened valve. The pipe burst. A torrent of liquid nitrogen at 300 degrees below zero erupted into the corridor. Isaac dove backward behind a bulkhead just as the freezing cloud violently expanded. The supercooled gas was immediately sucked into the control room's air intake vent. Inside the glass booth, Higgins barely had time to scream before the temperature plummeted to instantly lethal levels. The alien technician froze solid, his hand still hovering over the final purge confirmation button. Isaac, shivering violently from the ambient cold drop, crawled back to the door, punched in the manual override, and shattered the frozen locking mechanism with his wrench. He stepped over Higgins' rigid form and slapped the emergency abort switch, restoring the coolant flow just as the reactor core temperature alarm began to blare. The reactors stabilized. The first wave was dead. The saboteur was dealt with. But as Isaac leaned against the console, catching his breath, the station violently shuddered again. A deep mechanical groan resonated through the floor plates. "Fletcher!" Wyatt's voice came over the comms, hollow and defeated. "You need to get back to the bridge. The boarding craft were just a distraction. The Dreadnought. It's moving in and it's charging its main spinal cannon." Isaac looked out a small viewport in the engineering bay. The massive, jagged wedge of the pirate flagship loomed in the darkness, dominating the stars. And at its nose, a terrifying sphere of white-hot plasma was building, aimed directly at Acheron Station. They had survived the night, but dawn was here, and it was carrying a very big gun. Isaac burst onto the command deck, his boots slipping slightly on the steel grating. The bridge was illuminated entirely by the harsh, pulsing red glow of the tactical holo table. The main view screen, normally reserved for tracking benign cargo freighters, was currently dominated by the monolithic silhouette of the Blood Iron Dreadnought. It was a beast of jagged, dark metal, a kilometer long and bristling with weapon emplacements. At its prow, 2 massive conductive prongs were channeling energy into a localized singularity. A sphere of superheated plasma was growing rapidly, glowing with a terrifying, blinding intensity. "Time until that thing fires?" Isaac asked, his chest heaving as he stared at the screen. Commander Wyatt sat slumped in his chair, his avian features drooping in absolute defeat. 3 minutes, Mr. Fletcher. It is a siege cannon meant to crack planetary shields. When it discharges, Acheron Station will not simply explode. We will be atomized. Security Chief Logan was pacing like a caged predator. My lasers cannot reach it. It is holding position just outside our maximum optical range. The pirate commander is taking his time. He knows we are helpless. Nothing is helpless, Isaac muttered, moving to the main console and violently shoving the debris of a shattered data pad out of the way. His fingers danced across the keys, pulling up the station's deep-level structural schematics. He didn't look at the weapons. He looked at the logistics. Wyatt, this station was built as a deep space tritium refueling depot, Isaac said, his eyes scanning a blueprint of the lower decks. How do we get the refined fuel from our holding tanks to the coalition capital ships that dock here? Wyatt blinked, confused by the sudden change in topic. We use the primary magnetic umbilical. It is a massive electromagnetic accelerator tube running the length of the station's central spine. It launches the heavy fuel pods at high velocity, so the capital ships don't have to enter the gas giant's gravity well. A magnetic accelerator tube, Isaac repeated, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. Also known in military terms as a coil gun or a mass driver. Logan stopped pacing. Fletcher, you cannot be serious. The umbilical track is meant to launch stable fuel pods, not weapons. And even if you could fire a piece of scrap metal out of it, it wouldn't even dent a dreadnought's forward deflector shields. You're right. A piece of scrap wouldn't scratch it, Isaac agreed, pulling up a new schematic on the hollow table. But I'm not going to fire scrap metal. We're going to fire Reactor 4. Silence fell over the bridge. Even the groaning of the station's overstressed bulkheads seemed to quiet down. Reactor 4? Wyatt whispered, horrified. The General Electric Class 5 fusion core? Fletcher, those reactors weigh 400 tons and contain miniature suns. They are the only things keeping our structural integrity fields active. And they were designed by paranoid human engineers, Isaac shot back. I read the Westinghouse manual on the flight out here. The cores are fully modular. They were designed with emergency ejection rails in case of a catastrophic meltdown. We can detach it, drop it directly into the primary magnetic umbilical, and launch it. Isaac quickly drafted the sequence and threw it onto the holographic display for the crew to see. Operation Archimedes Strike. Step 1. Disengage magnetic containment locks on Reactor 4. Step 2. Bleed the primary coolant to force the core into an uncontrolled thermal runaway state. Step 3. Drop the destabilized core into the refueling umbilical track. Step 4. Overload the umbilical's electromagnets, firing the 400-ton core at 12,000 kilometers per second. If we time it right, the core will achieve critical mass exactly as it strikes the dreadnought's deflector shields, Isaac explained, tapping the hologram. It won't just hit them with kinetic force. It will hit them with the concussive yield of a thermonuclear warhead. Logan's scaly jaw dropped. It is madness. If the core detonates while still inside the umbilical track, it will rip Acheron Station in half. Then we better not miss, Isaac said dryly. But we have a major problem. The umbilical track is fixed. Points straight down. The dreadnought is currently holding position off our port bow, 30 degrees out of alignment. Wyatt noted, his panic giving way to the cold logic of Isaac's insane plan. We cannot re-aim the track. We must re-aim the entire station. Isaac nodded. Logan, the central computer is locked out from Higgins' sabotage. The attitude thrusters won't respond to remote commands. I need you and your heaviest security personnel down in the exterior maneuvering pods. You have to manually override the gyroscopes and fire the attitude thrusters. You need to physically rotate this 3 million ton station 30 degrees to port. The structural frame will scream, Logan warned, grabbing his heavy pulse rifle. Civilian stations aren't meant to yaw that fast. Then let it scream. You have 2 minutes, Chief. Go. Logan didn't hesitate. He roared an order in his native tongue, and a dozen security officers sprinted out of the command center, heading for the lower airlocks. Isaac turned back to his console, opening the direct feed to Engineering Deck 4. The dreadnought's plasma weapon on the main screen was no longer just glowing. It was pulsating violently. The pirate ship was making its final calibrations. Wyatt, I need you on the umbilical controls, Isaac commanded. When I say go, I need you to dump every single ounce of auxiliary power this station has into the magnetic track. Turn off the life support. Turn off the gravity. Turn off the lights. Give me everything. Wyatt nodded, his talons gripping the edge of the console. May the ancestors forgive us. Deep in the bowels of the station, Logan and his team reached the manual override levers for the attitude thrusters. These were massive industrial hydraulic levers designed to be used by heavy loading mechs, not organic crew. "Heave!" Logan roared over his radio. 3 massive reptilian guards threw their combined weight against the portside lever. First, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening screech of stressed titanium, the manual valves cracked open. Up on the bridge, Isaac felt the deck tilt violently beneath his boots. The entire station groaned a deep, terrifying sound of metal bending against the laws of physics. The structural integrity alarms began to blare a discordant symphony of imminent failure. 15 degrees. Wyatt yelled, watching the gyroscope readouts as the station slowly lumbered into a turn. 20 degrees. The hull plating on Sector 4 is buckling. "Hold it together," Isaac whispered, staring at the main screen. The dreadnought was slowly sliding into the center of the targeting reticle. "Warning! Enemy vessel is locking on," the station's automated voice announced, eerily calm amidst the chaos. "They see us rotating." Isaac gritted his teeth. "They know we're lining something up." On the dreadnought, the pirate commander had clearly realized that the seemingly dead station was not waiting to be executed. The massive sphere of plasma at the prow of the ship flared to maximum intensity. They were firing early. 28 degrees. Wyatt screamed. 29. 30. "We are aligned." "Logan, kill the thrusters," Isaac shouted. He slammed his fist down on the engineering console, severing the final containment clamps on Reactor 4. Deep inside the station, the massive glowing heart of the General Electric Fusion Core abruptly dropped out of its housing. It plummeted heavily into the cavernous reinforced tunnel of the primary magnetic refueling umbilical. "Reactor is in the chamber," Isaac yelled, his fingers flying across the terminal. "Bleeding coolant. Thermal runaway in 5 seconds." Inside the umbilical track, the 400-ton core began to pulse with a furious, blinding white light. Deprived of its cooling jackets, the miniature sun inside the casing began to expand, violently pushing against the magnetic containment fields. "Wyatt, give me the power." Wyatt grabbed the master breaker for the station's secondary systems and ruthlessly yanked it down. Acheron Station went instantly terrifyingly dark. Gravity vanished, sending data pads and loose tools floating into the air. Life support hummed to a halt. Every single volt of electricity generated by the remaining 3 reactors was violently shunted directly into the umbilical track. The station vibrated so violently that Isaac's teeth rattled in his skull. The electromagnet surrounding the launch tube hummed with a deafening, earth-shattering roar. "Fire!" Isaac roared. At the exact same moment, the pirate dreadnought discharged its siege cannon. A beam of superheated plasma, thick enough to swallow a skyscraper, erupted from the ship's prow, hurtling across the void toward Acheron Station. But it was met halfway. A blinding streak of pure, unadulterated kinetic fury shot out from the belly of the refueling depot. The overloaded fusion core accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light and crossed the 10 kilometers gap in less than a heartbeat. It collided perfectly with the incoming plasma beam. The impact did not create a standard explosion. It created a temporary, localized star. The heat of the dreadnought's weapon instantly stripped away the reactor's remaining containment fields, detonating the unstable fusion core midway between the 2 vessels. The resulting blast wave was a terrifying halo of pure energy that expanded outward in absolute silence. The pirate dreadnought, caught point-blank in the detonation of a Class 5 fusion bomb, never stood a chance. Its forward deflector shields shattered like glass. The jagged dark metal hull simply ceased to exist, vaporized instantly by the multi-megaton flash. The shockwave tore through the ship's internal magazines, setting off a chain reaction that ripped the kilometer-long vessel into millions of glowing molten fragments. A split second later, the edge of the blast wave slammed into Acheron Station. Isaac was thrown violently backward, hitting the bulkhead as the station spun wildly out of control. The reinforced plastal windows of the command center instantly blackened as their polarization filters overloaded. The sound of tearing metal echoed through the hull as the station was pushed backward into the upper atmosphere of the gas giant below. And then absolute silence. Isaac groaned, floating weightlessly in the dark. He tasted blood in his mouth. "Wyatt!" he croaked, coughing violently. "Logan!" Emergency battery lights flickered on, casting a dim yellow glow across the ruined bridge. Wyatt was strapped into his chair, looking dazed but alive. The intercom crackled. "Fletcher!" Logan's voice came through, heavy with static. "We are alive. We are floating. But the hull is holding, barely." Isaac unbuckled himself, pushing off the wall to float over to the manual viewport controls. He pulled the heavy physical lever, retracting the blast shields over the main window. The void outside was unrecognizable. Where the Blood Iron Fleet had once gathered to enact a massacre, there was now only a vast glowing field of twisted debris, molten slag, and frozen clouds of venting atmosphere. The dreadnought was gone. The surviving fighters had either been annihilated by the shockwave or were desperately fleeing into deep space, their thrusters burning wildly as they ran from the human-engineered nightmare. "By the ancestors," Wyatt whispered, unbuckling his harness and floating beside Isaac to stare out at the carnage. "You did it. You broke the armada." "We did it," Isaac corrected, wiping blood from his chin. "Commander, but let's not make a habit of it. I'm pretty sure firing a reactor violates several OSHA regulations." 3 hours later, the coalition cavalry finally arrived. A strike force of heavy cruisers dropped out of hyperspace, their weapons charged and ready to engage the infamous Blood Iron Fleet and avenge the doomed station. Instead, Captain Henderson of the coalition vessel Vanguard stood on his immaculate bridge in absolute silence, staring at his tactical readout. Acheron Station was battered, scorched, and missing its entire lower umbilical assembly. It was limping along on auxiliary power, spinning lazily above the gas giant. Surrounding it was the largest graveyard of pirate vessels Henderson had ever seen in his 30-year career. "Acheron Station, this is Captain Henderson of the Coalition Fleet," he broadcast, his voice laced with utter disbelief. "We are reading massive debris fields and 0 hostile contacts. Please report your status." "What the hell happened out there?" Static crackled over the comms for a moment before a tired, undeniably human voice replied. "Coalition Fleet, this is Isaac Fletcher, lead engineer of Acheron Station. Hostiles have been neutralized. The station is secure." There was a brief pause, followed by the sound of a hydro spanner clanking against metal. "And tell your command that I'm charging double time for the night shift. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our biology. It's our absolute stubborn refusal to accept the impossible." If you enjoyed watching a human engineer turn a rusting truck stop into a pirate's worst nightmare, hit that like button. Make sure to subscribe and ring the bell for more epic HFY sci-fi stories where human ingenuity conquers the cosmos. Share this video with your friends and let us know in the comments what everyday machine you would weaponize to defend a space station.